As for the house itself, there are two main components, I would say, that are always stressed. There is the house as space where you actually sleep, and also as a space of intimacy. And this is something, actually you have this very famous metaphor, of course, of the house, like entering a house as entering the intimacy of someone, which is really used a lot in the love songs, for example. But then besides that, there is also the garden. So this space outside, but that is close to the house, in which you can just talk, or you can just have a walk, or enjoy a good time. So this is also stressed a lot in Egyptian text. And then just on the classification level, well, yes, you have the pair sign for the building itself. But then, I mean, for everything that has to do with kind of organized space, basically, you have mostly the sign of the city, so the O49, which is also not something really inside, not inside the house, but it's a space that is safe, that is controlled somehow, in which you can just feel secure. And I think this is a big part, and that makes the link with what we were saying earlier. So I think that the concept of home for an Egyptian is definitely not only the house itself, but it's much broader than that. And the town is definitely a big part of it.
I would say it's interesting the distinction between like the word for pair, which is the standard word for house, but also hut, which is usually translated as castle. But it's more, I would say, hut in text is something that you build. So there is like the student that built a hut for the master is the hut in the Doomed Prince, that is like the building where people are inside, and usually a build that is kind of like isolated or cut out. And the hut also as a temple, but as the building of the temple. While pair has a more wide meaning, I would say, at least this is my feeling, can be the house, but can also be the estate, the household, the general, the Mediterranean concept of house, let's say. And at the same time, it's interesting because pair is also the temple. And just to connect with the Levant and to close with my side of the thing, I find it's interesting that we have a couple of Egyptian temples in the Levant, one in Gaza, one in Byblos. Temples that are mentioned in Egyptian text as temples. So the temple of the Balat in Byblos. And it's interesting because these temples are perceived. There is, for instance, in the biography of Minmose was an architect under Thutmose III that restored the temples, the Egyptian temples, and he gives a list of Egyptian temples. And among these Egyptian temples, there are also the temples in Byblos and the temples in probably somewhere north of Byblos. So these temples are perceived as Egyptian temples, and by extension, therefore, we can argue that these places in the Levant were perceived as somehow part of Egypt because they had an Egyptian temple, or at least a temple that was associated with a deity that was recognized by Egypt. And this played a role also on the trade, on the interactions between these places, and perhaps we can kind of approximate with the idea of embassies abroad, so something that is a part of our own world far away.
House and home, but I would think that the site of Deir el-Medina is all important in that respect because we have texts and we have the archaeology there. And so we can say something about how, from the economic documents, how people are living and the words that we use for all these living quarters, and generally how they're moving amongst the community. I think from memory, they have gates and security guards and they trade with each other outside and near the front gate and things like this. So that gives you some approximation onto what they considered to be a settlement and a home. But I would say that you're exactly right. The Northern European idea of house doesn't work in Egypt, and certainly doesn't work in Nubia, even in modern Nubia, where you have huge plazaed communities with large homes and courtyards. And that certainly wouldn't work to think of house as a center, the brick and mortar of a house to work as a center of social action.